In the unforgiving moors of 1885 Yorkshire, survival was the only law. Elaren Vance despised one man above all others, the elusive Duke of Blackwood, a tyrant she had never met, but whose greed was slowly killing her starving family. One stormy night, she risked her life to pull a mysterious, arrogant stranger from a deadly peat bog. She saved him, fed him, and nursed him back to health, unaware of the terrifying truth. The man sleeping by her fire wasn't just a stranger. He was the Duke himself, and he had just witnessed her treason against his name. The rain in North Yorkshire did not wash things clean. It merely turned the world into a heavy, sucking grey. Elaren Vance pulled her shawl tighter against her chest, the wool soaked through to her chemise. The basket of herbs on her arm felt like lead, a pathetic harvest that would barely fetch a shilling at the Oakhaven market, and certainly not enough to appease Silas Vane, the estate's bailiff. The road home was treacherous, a ribbon of churned earth that wound through the moors of the Blackwood estate. It was known locally as the Widow's Walk, not for any ghost, but because the treacherous footing had widowed more than one woman when horses lost their footing in the fog. Elaren's boots squelched loudly, the sound swallowed by the howling wind. She kept her head down, fighting the gale, until a sound cut through the storm. It wasn't the wind. It was a chaotic, wet thrashing, and a curse. "Damn you! Hold fast, you beast!" Elaren froze. The voice was deep, baritone, and distinctly out of place. It held the sharp, clipped edge of the aristocracy, or at least a man who wasn't used to pleading. She moved toward the edge of the road where the land dipped sharply into what the locals called Deadman's Dip. It was a deceptive patch of land. It looked like solid grass, but underneath was a slurry of ancient peat and clay that acted like quicksand in heavy rain. Squinting through the downpour, she saw him. A man was submerged up to his chest in the thick, black mire. He was clawing at a gnarled root protruding from the bank, his knuckles white, but the mud was winning. Every time he struggled, he sank an inch lower. His horse was nowhere to be seen, likely having thrown him and bolted. Elaren didn't think. Instinct, born of a life tending to helpless things, took over. She dropped her basket and scrambled down the safer, rocky embankment. "Stop moving!" she screamed over the wind. The man looked up. His face was a mask of mud, his dark hair plastered to his skull. His eyes, however, burned with a startling, intense blue, a shock of color in the grey storm. "I can't get leverage!" he roared back, panic lacing the command. "The suction is too strong." "If you thrash, you'll be buried in minutes," Elaren shouted, reaching the edge of the solid ground. She looked around frantically. She was slight, barely 5'3". If she grabbed his hand, he would pull her in. She spotted a fallen fence post, rotted but thick, lying in the bracken. She hefted it, groaning under the waterlogged weight, and thrust one end toward him. "Grab the wood! Do not pull me, just hold it!" The stranger lunged for the wood, his gloved hands slipping on the wet timber before finding a grip. "Now," Elaren commanded, planting her feet against a boulder. "On my count. 1, 2, pull!" She leaned back with every ounce of strength she possessed. The muscles in her back screamed. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The bog held him possessively, a jealous lover refusing to let go. Then, with a sickening schloop sound, the mud released his waist. "Again!" she cried. He groaned, a guttural sound of exertion, and dragged his torso onto the semi-solid bank. He didn't stop until he was fully clear of the muck, collapsing face first onto the wet grass, heaving for breath. Elaren fell back against the boulder, her chest heaving, rain mixing with the sweat on her brow. She stared at the lump of a man. He was large, broad-shouldered and long-limbed. His clothes, though ruined, were heavy wool and fine leather. After a moment, he rolled onto his back, wiping sludge from his eyes. He looked at her, blinking as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You," he rasped, coughing up a speck of grit. "You have a grip like a dock worker." Ilarin bristled, scrambling to her feet. She snatched up her basket, checking the herbs. Half were ruined. "And you have the common sense of a sheep. Who rides near Dead Man's Dip in a gale?" The man sat up slowly, wincing as he touched his left shoulder. "I was told this was the shortcut to the manor." "Told by whom? The devil?" Ilarin scoffed. "Only a fool takes this road, or a stranger." "I am a stranger," he said slowly. He watched her carefully. "I owe you my life, miss." "Vance. Ilarin Vance." She looked him up and down. "Can you walk? I won't carry you." He tried to stand, but his leg buckled. He hissed in pain. "My ankle. I think the horse stepped on it before he ran." Ilarin sighed, looking at the darkening sky. She couldn't leave him here. He would freeze to death before morning. But bringing him home meant another mouth to feed, another complication her father, Thomas, didn't need. "My cottage is 1/2 a mile down the ridge," she said, her voice hard. "Lean on me. But I warn you, we have no luxury. If you're expecting the comforts of the inn at Oakhaven, you'd be better off crawling there." The man looked at her outstretched hand, rough, red from the cold, and calloused. He took it. "I expect nothing," he said, his voice strangely quiet. "I am William." "Well, William," Ilarin grunted, taking his weight as he hobbled against her. "Let's get you out of this storm before the Duke's bailiff finds us and charges us a tax for loitering on his muddy road." She missed the way William's jaw tightened. "The Duke?" he asked, his voice tight. "You speak of the Duke of Blackwood?" "The Devil of Blackwood," she corrected, spitting on the ground. "If he were the one in that bog, I might have thought twice about passing that branch." Santos Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, the man who owned the very ground soaking into her boots, said nothing. He simply limped alongside the woman who had just saved his life and unknowingly declared war on his name. The Vance cottage was a small, stone structure that seemed to be sinking into the earth, defeated by the weight of the moss on its roof. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of peat smoke and the metallic tang of sickness. Santos, now William, had never stepped foot inside one of his tenants' homes. He had inherited the title 6 months ago after his father's death in London. He had spent those months reviewing ledgers that showed healthy profits and reading reports from his bailiff, Silas Vane, which claimed the tenant farmers were prosperous and content. He had ridden out alone today to surprise Vane, to see the estate for himself. He hadn't expected the landscape to be so hostile. He certainly hadn't expected this. As Ilarin kicked the door open, the reality of her poverty hit him like a physical blow. The floor was packed dirt. The windows were stuffed with rags to keep the wind out. In the corner, a gaunt man lay coughing in a bed that was little more than a pile of straw and blankets. "Ilarin," the old man wheezed, sitting up. "You're late, girl." "Storm caught me, Papa," she said, her tone softening instantly. She helped Santos to a wooden stool by the hearth. "And I found a stray, pulled him out of the dip." Thomas Vance squinted through the gloom. "A stray? We can barely feed the rats, let alone a man." "He's hurt," Ilarin said firmly, moving to the fire to stir a pot of thin broth. "He'll stay the night. He can leave when the storm breaks." Santos sat stiffly. He was dripping mud onto their floor. "I can pay," he said quickly, reaching for his coat pocket. He froze. His wallet, containing a substantial sum and his identification papers, was gone. It must have fallen out in the bog. He was the Duke of Blackwood, one of the wealthiest men in England, and he didn't have a farthing to his name. Ilarin saw him patting his pockets and let out a dry, humourless laugh. Lost your coin in the mud? Don't worry, William. We don't charge for hospitality. We aren't the Duke. There it was again. The venom. You speak of the Duke with much passion, Santos ventured, trying to keep his voice neutral as he unlaced his ruined boots. Ilarin handed him a rough towel. Passion? No. Hatred. He raised the rents 3 times this year. 3 times. And look at this roof. She gestured to a corner where water dripped steadily into a bucket. We asked for repairs in the spring. Vane told us the Duke said we should be grateful we have a roof at all. Santos felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The Duke said that? Personally. Through Vane. Thomas coughed from the bed. Silas Vane speaks for the master. Says the Duke needs more gold for his mistresses in London. Santos gripped the edge of the stool. He had no mistresses. He had spent the last 6 months in a dusty library in London, trying to modernize the estate's agriculture plans to help these people. He had sent money for repairs, thousands of pounds. Vane. The realization began to dawn on him. The bailiff wasn't just incompetent, he was a thief, and he was using Santos's name as a shield to terrorize the populace. Here. Ilarin shoved a wooden bowl into his hands. It contained a watery potato soup. Eat, it's hot. Santos looked at the soup. It was clearly their dinner. If he ate it, they would have less. I'm not hungry, he lied. Don't be stupid, Ilarin snapped, sitting on the floor near the fire and taking a smaller bowl for herself. You're shivering. Eat. He took a spoonful. It was bland, lacking salt, but it warmed him. He watched Ilarin as she fed her father, her movements gentle and practiced. Under the grime and the shapeless wool dress, she was striking, not in the porcelain doll way of the London debutantes, but in a fierce, elemental way. She had eyes like polished flint, and a mouth that seemed set in a permanent line of defiance. So, William, Ilarin said, turning back to him. What are you? You have soft hands. A clerk? A school teacher? Santos thought quickly. If he revealed he was the Duke now, after she had cursed him, she might throw him back into the storm. Or worse, she wouldn't believe him. He needed to see the extent of Vane's corruption. He needed to be a fly on the wall. I am a surveyor, he lied. I map land. I was coming to look at the boundaries of the estate. A surveyor, Thomas mused. Well, don't map this hovel. It's not worth the ink. Suddenly, a heavy pounding on the door made them all jump. Ilarin's face went pale. She scrambled up, putting a finger to her lips. Hide! She hissed at Santos. Why? It's Vane's men. They come at night to collect arrears. If they see a stranger, they'll think we have money to board lodgers. Santos felt a surge of rage. Collecting arrears at night? He didn't hide. He stood up, favoring his good leg, just as the door burst open. 2 men filled the doorway. They were big, carrying heavy cudgels. Santos recognized the insignias on their coats, his own family crest. Well now, Ilarin, the lead man sneered. He had a scarred lip and eyes devoid of mercy. Silas sent us. Said you were short on the weekly coin. I paid last Tuesday, Ilarin cried, stepping between the men and her father's bed. I gave you the last of the wool money. Interest, love. Interest acts up in this weather. The man laughed. He stepped forward, reaching out to grab her arm. Take your hand off her. A voice boomed from the shadows. The thug stopped, blinking. He looked at the tall, mud-caked figure by the fire. Santos drew himself up to his full height, Even in ruined clothes, he possessed an authority that filled the room. "Who the hell are you?" the thug spat. "I am a guest," Santos said, his voice ice-cold. "And you are trespassing. Leave, now." The thug laughed, exchanging a look with his partner. "A guest? Looks like a beggar to me. Maybe we'll beat the rent out of you, beggar." The man raised his cudgel and swung. It was a clumsy blow. Santos, trained in boxing by the best pugilists in London, sidestepped despite his bad ankle. He drove a hard, precise fist into the man's solar plexus. The thug doubled over, gasping for air. The second man lunged. Santos grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and swung it with a vicious crack against the man's wrist. The cudgel clattered to the floor. "Get out!" Santos snarled, pointing the poker at the leader's throat. "Tell Silas Vane that if he sends dogs to harass women again, I will break every bone in their bodies." Terrified by the speed and violence of the defense, the two thugs scrambled backward, dragging each other out into the rain. Silence descended on the cottage. Elarin stared at Santos, her chest heaving. She looked at his hands, the soft hands of a surveyor, now clenched into fists of iron. "Who are you really, William?" she whispered, fear and fascination warring in her eyes. Santos lowered the poker. He looked at her, seeing the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. If he told her he was the Duke, she would see him as the source of those men, not her defender. "I told you," he said softly. "I'm just a man who owes you a debt." But as he looked around the wretched cottage, Santos knew the debt was far larger than she realized, and he intended to pay it in full, starting with the destruction of Silas Vane. The silence that followed the thug's departure was heavy, filled only by the crackle of the dying fire and Thomas Vance's ragged breathing. Ellerin didn't move immediately. She stood staring at the door, her hands trembling. It wasn't the violence that shook her. She had seen tavern brawls in Oakhaven before. It was the precision of it. William, this muddy, limping stranger, had dismantled two of Silas Vane's enforcers with the efficiency of a soldier. She turned to him. He was leaning against the stone hearth, the iron poker still in his hand, his chest rising and falling rhythmically. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, making him look less like a lost traveler and more like a statue carved from granite. "You've done it now," Elarin whispered, the adrenaline fading into dread. "They'll be back, and they won't bring cudgels next time. They'll bring a magistrate." "They won't," Santos said, his voice low. He set the poker down. "Men like that are cowards. They thrive on fear. When fear fails, they retreat to lick their wounds." "You don't know Silas Vane," she countered, moving to check on her father. Thomas had fallen into a fitful sleep, exhausted by the excitement. "Vane is the Duke's right hand. He doesn't forgive humiliation." "Then perhaps it is time the Duke's hand was severed," Santos muttered darkly. Elarin looked at him sharply. "You talk treason, Surveyor. Be careful. The Blackwood Reach is long." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Let me see your hand. You cut it on the man's teeth." Santos looked down. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He hadn't felt it. He sat obediently as Elarin fetched a basin of water and a strip of clean linen. As she washed the blood away, her fingers were cool and rough against his skin. He watched her face, the concentration in her brow, the way she bit her lower lip. She was beautiful, yes, but it was a beauty born of resilience, like heather growing on a wind-swept crag. "Why did you help us?" she asked, not looking up. "You could have hidden. You could have run." "I told you," Santos said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I pay my debts." "This is no debt," she said softly, tying the bandage. "This is a war, and you've just conscripted yourself." She looked up, and for a moment Their faces were inches apart. The air in the cottage seemed to thin. Santos felt a pull he hadn't experienced in the ballrooms of Mayfair, a magnetic draw to this woman who smelled of rain and dried sage. "Where will you go tomorrow?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly. Santos made a decision then. He couldn't return to Blackwood Manor. Not yet. If he walked in now, Vane would know he had been compromised. Vane would destroy the evidence, cook the books, perhaps even arrange an accident for the Duke before Santos could prove the embezzlement. No, he needed to watch. He needed to gather proof. And he needed to protect this family. "I can't travel," he lied smoothly. "My ankle. It's worse than I thought. And I have no money until my bank in London wires funds to the local post. I need a place to stay." Ilaran frowned. "We have no room, William, and no food to spare." "I can work," he said. "I saw your roof. It needs shoring up before the next frost. I saw the fence in the paddock. It's rotted through. I'm a surveyor, but I know structure. Let me fix your home, in exchange for a corner of the floor and a share of the soup." Ilaran studied him. He was offering labor that would cost her weeks of wages she didn't have. "You'd fix the roof? For broth? And shelter?" he added. "And perhaps you can tell me more about this Duke of yours?" Ilaran hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But if you slack, or if you bring trouble, you're out. I won't risk my father for a stray." The next morning broke cold and clear. The storm had scrubbed the sky a brilliant, pale blue. Santos woke with a stiff back, the hard earth floor a brutal reminder of his new reality. He rolled up his coat, which had served as a pillow, and stepped outside. The Vance holding was small, a few acres of rocky soil on the edge of the moor. But the view was spectacular. To the east, the sun was rising over the distant peaks. To the west, the sprawling grey stone pile of Blackwood Manor dominated the valley. His home, or rather, his fortress, currently occupied by the enemy. He needed to get a message to his solicitor, Arthur Penhaligon, in London. Arthur was the only man he trusted. He needed Arthur to come to Yorkshire, quietly, and bring the original estate charters. Admiring the view, Santos turned. Ilaran was coming from the chicken coop, holding 3 brown eggs. "It's beautiful," he said, in a savage sort of way. "It's hard," she corrected. "Beauty doesn't fill the belly." She handed him an egg. "Raw or boiled? We're out of peat for the fire until I cut more." "Raw is fine," he said, cracking the shell and swallowing the yolk in one gulp, a trick he'd learned at boarding school on a dare. It was surprisingly sustaining. "I need to go into Oakhaven," he said. "To send a letter to my firm, to tell them I'm delayed." "I'm going to market," Ilaran said. "You can walk with me, but keep your head down. Vane's men will be nursing hangovers and bruises, and they'll be looking for someone to blame." The walk to Oakhaven took an hour. The town was a cluster of slate-roofed buildings huddled around a market square. It should have been a bustling, prosperous hub for the estate's tenants. Instead, Santos saw signs of decay everywhere. The inn needed paint, the children playing in the gutter were too thin, the shop windows were dusty. This was his legacy. His father had been old and sick for years, leaving the management to Vane. Santos felt a wave of shame. He had been enjoying the clubs of London while his people slowly starved. As they entered the market, hush fell over the crowd. At the center of the square, a carriage stood. It was black, polished to a mirror shine, with the Blackwood crest on the door. A man was standing on a crate next to it, addressing the crowd. He was tall, thin, and dressed in a suit of severe black superfine wool, He wore a high, stiff collar and wire-rimmed spectacles that hid his eyes. He looked like an undertaker or a vulture. "Silas Vane," Ilarin whispered, gripping Santos's arm. "Don't look at him." Santos looked. He burned the man's face into his memory. "Listen well." Vane's voice was reedy but carried across the square. "The Duke has written from London. He is displeased with the harvest returns. He demands a special levy, 2 shillings per household, due by month's end." A collective groan went up from the crowd. "2 shillings?" a blacksmith shouted. "We haven't got 2 pennies, Silas. The wheat rot took half the crop." Vane turned his head slowly, like a reptile. "Then sell your tools, Smith, or sell your horse. The Duke does not care for your excuses. He cares for his gold." Santos's fists clenched at his sides. "Liar!" he screamed internally. "I never sent such a letter." "And," Vane continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips, "there is a rumor of a vagrant causing trouble on the Widow's Walk, assaulting estate staff. If anyone harbors this criminal, their tenancy will be revoked immediately. The Duke has authorized me to hang the man as a poacher." Ilarin went rigid. Santos placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. He felt the trembling of her frame. He leaned down, whispering in her ear. "Steady, he's bluffing. He doesn't know who I am." "He'll hang you," she hissed. "We have to go." "Not yet," Santos said. He was watching Vane step down from the crate. The bailiff didn't get back into the carriage. Instead, he walked toward the terrified blacksmith, flanked by the same 2 thugs from the night before. Santos saw Vane lean in and say something to the smith. The smith turned pale and pulled a leather ring from his finger, a wedding band, and dropped it into Vane's outstretched palm. Vane pocketed the ring, patted the man's cheek patronizingly, and moved on. "He's not collecting taxes," Santos murmured, a cold realization washing over him. "He's shaking them down. That money never sees the estate ledgers." "Tell that to the magistrate," Ilarin said bitterly. "Come on, before we're seen." They retreated to the edge of the town. Santos managed to slip a hastily scrawled note to the postmaster, a confused old man he bribed with his gold signet ring, the only item of value he had left, which he had pulled from his finger and hidden in his pocket. "Arthur," the note read, "come to Oakhaven, bring the books. Trust no one at the manor. I am alive, but underground. S." As they walked back to the cottage, the silence between them was different. It wasn't fearful anymore. It was the silence of shared danger. "You saw him," Ilarin said finally. "That is the man you poked in the eye." "I saw a thief," Santos said, "and I saw a town that needs a leader." "They have a leader," Ilarin spat. "The Duke, and he is the worst of them all." Santos stopped on the road. He grabbed her arm, gently but firmly, forcing her to look at him. "Ilarin," he said, using her name for the first time. "What if the Duke doesn't know?" She laughed, a harsh sound. "He owns the land, William. How could he not know?" "Perhaps he is a fool," Santos said softly. "Perhaps he was young and trusted the wrong men. Perhaps he is waking up." Ilarin searched his eyes, confused by the intensity in his blue gaze. "You speak as if you know him." "I know men," Santos said, "and I know that evil like Vane's thrives in the dark. Maybe it's time someone lit a lantern." The next week was a revelation for the Duke of Blackwood. He had expected the work to be hard. He had not expected it to be transformative. Santos spent the days on the roof of the Vance cottage. He stripped away the rotted thatch, replacing it with fresh heather and straw bundled tightly against the wind. His hands, once manicured and soft, blistered, then bled, then calloused. His muscles, toned by fencing and boxing, grew hard and functional. He learned the rhythm of the poor. He learned that hunger was a constant, dull ache that made you dizzy by mid-afternoon. He learned that a hot cup of tea was a luxury to be savoured in silence. And he learned about Elerin. She was a force of nature. She worked harder than any man he had ever met. She tended the garden, cared for her father, mended clothes for the neighbours for pennies, and still found time to gather herbs on the dangerous moors. She was also proud. She refused his help in the kitchen, refused to let him give her the larger portion of food, refused to let him see her cry when her father coughed blood. One afternoon, as Santos was hammering a loose board on the side of the cottage, Elerin came around the corner carrying a bucket of water. She stopped, watching him. He had taken off his shirt in the unseasonable heat. His back was broad, scarred from a childhood riding accident, and slick with sweat. He sensed her eyes and turned, wiping his forehead with his arm. Roof is sealed. It should hold through winter. Elerin stared at him. She had tried to keep her distance, tried to remind herself he was a transient stranger who would leave her eventually. But seeing him there, building a shelter for her dying father, something in her chest tightened painfully. "You work like a demon," she said, setting the bucket down. "For a surveyor." Santos hopped down from the ladder. He walked over to the bucket, took a ladle, and drank deep. Water ran down his chin and onto his chest. "I like to finish what I start," he said. "And when will you be finished, William?" she asked, her voice quiet. "When will you leave?" Santos lowered the ladle. He looked at the cottage, then at the distant manor house, and finally at her. "Not yet," he said. "I'm waiting for news." "From your wife?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Santos smiled, a genuine crooked smile that made Elarin's breath catch. "I have no wife, Elerin. No family. Just a job I haven't done very well lately." He stepped closer. The smell of him, sweat, straw, and honest work, filled her senses. "You're a strange man," she whispered. "You talk like a gentleman, fight like a soldier, and work like a tenant." "Maybe I'm trying to figure out which one I am," he murmured. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Elerin leaned into the touch, closing her eyes. It was a moment of suspended time, fragile as glass. "Elerin." Her father's voice from inside shattered the moment. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. I have to check the stew," she stammered, hurrying inside. Santos stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was falling in love with her. The realization was terrifying. He was a duke, she was a peasant. In London, this would be a scandal. Here, it was impossible. When she found out who he was, when she found out he was the symbol of her oppression, she would hate him. He had to fix it. He had to destroy Vane before he revealed himself. 2 days later, the news arrived, but not from London. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Santos was chopping wood when he saw a cloud of dust on the road. It wasn't the slow plod of a farm cart. It was the fast, aggressive pace of riders. He drove the axe into the stump and wiped his hands. 3 horses pulled up to the cottage. Silas Vane sat atop the lead horse, a magnificent black stallion that Santos recognized immediately. Thunder, his father's favorite hunter. Vane was riding the Duke's own horse. Flanking Vane were the 2 thugs, now sporting healing bruises and looking murderous. Elerin came out of the cottage, wiping her hands on her apron. She saw Vane and went pale, backing up until she hit the wall. "Good afternoon, Miss Vance," Vane purred, looking down from the saddle. He ignored Santos completely, treating him as part of the scenery. "Mr. Vane," Elerin said, her voice trembling. "We have the rent. I have it inside." "Oh, I'm not here for the rent," Vane smiled, showing yellowed teeth. He pulled a rolled parchment from his coat. "I'm here for the eviction." "Eviction?" Ilarin gasped. "On what grounds? We've paid." "The lease." "The lease," Vane interrupted, "contains a morality clause. Tenants must remain of good character and harbour no criminals." He finally looked at Santos. "You are harbouring a fugitive, a man known to assault estate staff." "He is a guest!" Ilarin cried, stepping in front of Santos. "He helped us." "He is a vagrant," Vane snapped. "And you are out. You have until sundown to vacate the premises. Whatever is left inside becomes the property of the Blackwood estate." "You can't do this!" Ilarin screamed. "My father is sick! If you move him, he will die!" "Then perhaps he should have raised a more obedient daughter," Vane said coldly. "Sundown, Miss Vance, or we burn it down with you inside." Vane turned his horse to leave. "Wait." The single word cut through the air like a whip crack. Santos stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He walked calmly toward the horse, his eyes locked on Vane's. Vane looked down, amused. "The vagrant speaks. Do you want to be arrested now, or shall I send the constable later?" Santos stopped at the horse's flank. He reached up and stroked Thunder's nose. The horse, usually skittish with strangers, nudged Santos's pocket, recognizing his master's scent. "I suggest you reconsider, Silas," Santos said. His voice dropped the rural accent he had been affecting. It became crisp, commanding, the voice of Eton and Oxford. Vane frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "You address me by my Christian name. You filth." "I address you as what you are," Santos said. "A petty thief riding a horse he isn't fit to saddle." The thugs moved forward, reaching for their weapons. "I wouldn't," Santos warned, his gaze never leaving Vane. "Because if you touch me, or this family, you will not just lose your position. You will hang." Vane laughed, but it was a nervous sound. There was something about this labourer, the way he stood, the way the horse accepted him, that triggered a primal alarm in the bailiff's brain. "Big words for a man standing in the mud," Vane sneered. "Sundown, Vance, or the fire." He spurred the horse and galloped away, his men following. Santos watched them go, his face a mask of cold fury. He turned to Ilarin. She was slumped against the wall, sobbing. "We have to go," she wept. "We have to pack. Papa, oh God, Papa." "No," Santos said. He walked over to her and took her face in his hands. "You are not packing. You are not leaving." "Did you not hear him?" she cried, pushing at his chest. "He owns the law. He owns the land." "He owns nothing," Santos said fiercely. He made a decision. The masquerade was over. It was dangerous. It was premature. But he had no choice. He could not let them be thrown into the cold. "Ilarin, listen to me," he said, his voice intense. "Trust me one last time. Do not pack. Keep the door locked. I have to go to Oakhaven." "Why?" she sobbed. "To run away?" "No," Santos said. "To get my name back." He kissed her forehead, a promise, and turned, sprinting toward the road. He had 3 hours until sundown. He needed to find Arthur Penhaligon. If the solicitor hadn't arrived, Santos would have to face Vane alone, without proof, and hope that the authority of his blood was enough to stop a massacre. But as he ran, he knew one thing for certain. Tonight, the Duke of Blackwood was returning home, and he was bringing hell with him. Santos ran until his lungs burned and his bad ankle screamed in protest, but he did not stop until the slate roofs of Oakhaven came into view. The sun was already beginning its descent, casting long, menacing shadows across the valley. He burst into the market square, startling a group of geese. He was a sight to behold, shirtless, covered in sweat and sawdust, his hair wild. People stared, whispering. the mad vagrant Vane had warned them about. He scanned the square. The post office was closed. The inn was quiet. Panic clawed at his throat. If Arthur hadn't come... Then he saw it. Parked discreetly behind the blacksmith shop was a carriage. It wasn't the flashy black lacquer of the ducal fleet. It was a sturdy, unassuming travel coach with London plates. And standing next to it, looking fastidiously at a speck of dirt on his glove, was a short, round man with spectacles. "Arthur!" Santos roared. Arthur Penhaligon jumped, nearly dropping his cane. He squinted at the half-naked savage charging toward him. "Good heavens!" Arthur squeaked, as Santos skidded to a halt. "Santos, is that you? You look like... well, like a barbarian." "The papers," Santos gasped, gripping Arthur's shoulders. "Do you have the papers?" I do, Arthur stammered, adjusting his glasses. "I received your note yesterday. I came on the express train and hired a coach. But Santos, what is going on? The town says the Duke is in London. They say a madman is loose on the moors." "Vane," Santos spat the name. "He's been bleeding them dry, Arthur. Embezzlement, extortion, theft, and he's about to evict a dying man and his daughter." He looked at the sky. The sun was touching the horizon. "I need your carriage," Santos said, "and I need you to witness what happens next. Drive me to the Vance cottage, now." Back at the cottage, the air was thick with terror. Elarin had dragged her father's mattress to the center of the room, away from the walls in case they fired the thatch. Thomas was awake, clutching a rusty knife, his eyes bright with fever and fear. "I won't let them take you, Papa," Elarin whispered, though she had no weapon but a heavy cast-iron skillet. Outside, the sound of hooves approached. Elarin's heart stopped. She looked out the crack in the window shutter. It wasn't Vane. It was a carriage. She watched as the door opened. A small, confused-looking man in a suit stepped out, followed by William. But it wasn't the William she knew. He had donned a coat, too tight for his broad shoulders, that the small man had evidently given him. He strode toward the cottage, not with the limp of a labourer, but with the terrifying purpose of a king. "Elarin," he shouted, "open the door." She unbarred it, shaking. "William, who is this?" "This is Arthur Penhaligon," Santos said, gesturing to the solicitor. "A friend. He's going to stay with your father." "What are you doing?" she cried. "Vane will be here any minute." "I know," Santos said. He turned to Arthur. "Stay inside. Do not come out until I say. Protect them." "Santos, please," Arthur whispered, looking at the horizon. "This is dangerous. Let me show them the seal. Let me—" "No," Santos cut him off. "Vane needs to show his hand. He needs to commit the crime in front of witnesses." He turned to Elarin. She was looking at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Trust me," he said again. "I trust you," she whispered, realizing with a jolt that it was true. She would trust this man with her life. "Good." They waited. The sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. Then the torches appeared. A procession of riders crested the hill. Vane was at the front, holding a flaming torch. Behind him were 6 men, his usual thugs, plus a few hired ruffians from the docks of Whitby. They circled the cottage, whooping and jeering. "Time's up, Vance!" Vane shouted. "Come out, or we roast you like pigs!" Santos stepped out of the cottage door. He stood alone in the small dirt yard, his arms crossed. "The house is occupied, Vane," Santos called out. His voice was calm, carrying easily over the noise of the horses. Vane reined in his stallion. He squinted at Santos. "You again? The hero. I told you, vagrant, tonight you hang." "On whose authority?" Santos asked. "The Duke's," Vane roared. "I am the law here." "The Duke," Santos repeated slowly. "Tell me, Silas, Does the Duke know you charge 2 shillings for a harvest tax he never authorized?" Vane stiffened. The men behind him quieted down, sensing a shift in the air. "Does the Duke know," Santos continued, stepping forward, "that you pocket the rent from the tenant farms, that you let the cottages rot while you buy racehorses, that you terrorize women and sick old men in his name?" "Silence him!" Vane screamed to his men. "Cut him down!" 2 riders spurred their horses forward. "Stop!" The command was so loud, so filled with raw, absolute power, that the horses actually shied, rearing up. Santos reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a heavy parchment scroll, bound with a thick red ribbon and a gold wax seal. He held it up to the torchlight. "Do you recognize this seal?" "Silas," Santos asked. Vane's eyes widened. He knew that seal. It was the ducal seal of Blackwood, the original charter. Where did you get that?" Vane stammered. "You stole it! He's a thief! Kill him!" "I didn't steal it," Santos said. He untied the ribbon and let the parchment unroll. "It belongs to me." He looked at the mercenaries. "My name is Santos Arthur Thorne. I am the 12th Duke of Blackwood, and you are riding my horses." Silence crashed down on the clearing. Absolute, stunned silence. The mercenaries looked at Vane. They looked at Santos. They looked at the unmistakable arrogance, the posture, the face that, now that the mud was gone, bore the striking resemblance to the old Duke in the portrait at the town hall. "Liar!" Vane shrieked, his voice cracking. "He's a liar! The Duke is in London! Kill him, you fools, or I'll dock your pay!" "Arthur!" Santos called out. Arthur Penhaligon stepped out of the cottage. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the men. "I am Arthur Penhaligon, solicitor at law, of the firm Penhaligon and Crouch, London," he announced in his crisp, dry voice. "I can attest that this man is indeed His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood. And I have here," he patted a satchel, "the ledgers proving Mr. Vane's systematic theft of £40,000 over the last 5 years." The mercenaries looked at each other. They were hired muscle, not suicidal fanatics. They knew the penalty for assaulting a peer of the realm. One by one they lowered their weapons. "Get off my land," Santos said to the mercenaries. "Now, and if I ever see any of you in Yorkshire again, you will rot in Newgate." The men didn't hesitate. They turned their horses and galloped away into the night, leaving Silas Vane alone. Vane sat on thunder, trembling. His face was grey. "Your Grace," he whispered, the torch shaking in his hand. I was only trying to maintain order." Santos walked up to the horse. He grabbed Vane's leg and yanked him out of the saddle. Vane hit the ground with a thud. Santos stood over him, the firelight casting him as an avenging angel. "You have destroyed my name," Santos said, his voice low and dangerous. "You have starved my people. You have threatened the woman I—" He stopped, glancing at the cottage door where Ilarin was standing, hand over her mouth. "Get up," Santos ordered. Vane scrambled to his feet, weeping. "Please, Your Grace. Mercy. I have a family." "You have a cell waiting for you in York," Santos said. "Arthur, tie him up. We take him to the magistrate ourselves." Santos turned to the cottage. Ilarin was staring at him. Her face wasn't filled with relief. It was filled with betrayal. She looked at the Duke, the man she had cursed, the man who represented everything she hated, standing in the body of the man she had saved. She turned around and slammed the door. The weeks following the arrest of Silas Vane transformed the Blackwood estate, but they broke the heart of its master. News of the beggar Duke spread like wildfire across Yorkshire. Santos didn't hide in his manor. He worked. He established a temporary office in the town hall, fired every corrupt overseer Vane had appointed, and slashed the rents to pre-Vane levels. He hired local men, at fair wages, to repair every rotting cottage and broken fence in the valley. The tenants, once terrified of the Blackwood name, now cheered when he rode by. But Santos was miserable. Every evening he rode thunder to the Vance cottage, and every evening the door remained shut. Thomas Vance was recovering, tended to by the Duke's own physician. The larder was stocked with fresh game and wine. The roof was watertight. Yet Ellerin returned every personal letter unopened. She accepted the help for her father's sake, but she would not accept the man who had lied to her. A month later, amidst a torrential downpour, Santos's patience snapped. He rode to the cottage, soaked to the bone, and stood beneath her window. "Ellarin!" he roared over the wind. "I am not leaving until you speak to me!" The shutters flew open. Ellarin stood there, her face pale and hard. "Go away, Your Grace." "Don't call me that," he pleaded, water streaming down his face. "I am William. I am the man who fixed your roof. I am the man you saved." "You are a liar," she shot back, though her voice trembled. "You sat at my fire, ate my soup, and listened to me curse your name. Did you laugh at me, inside your castle walls?" "I never laughed," Santos said, his voice raw. "I listened. You taught me what it means to be a leader, Ellarin. I was a useless, idle fool before I met you. You saved me from the mud, but you also saved me from myself." Ellarin gripped the windowsill, the rain masking the tears on her cheeks. "Dukes don't love peasant girls, Santos. They use them for stories to tell in London." "Then let me prove you wrong," he shouted. "Come to the winter solstice ball next week. If you come, and you still feel nothing, I will vanish from your life forever. I swear it." She looked at him, the most powerful man in the county, standing in the mud, begging for a chance. "One night," she whispered, "and then you leave me be." The night of the solstice ball, Blackwood Manor was a diamond set against the dark moors. The cream of Yorkshire society filled the ballroom, a sea of silk, jewels and gossip. They whispered about the reclusive Duke, wondering why he kept glancing at the doors. At midnight, the heavy oak doors groaned open. The room fell silent. Ellarin stood there. She wore no diamonds, only a dress of deep green velvet she had sewn herself, the colour of the moss on, the high ridges. Her hair was braided with a simple sprig of winter holly. She looked terrified, out of place, and utterly magnificent. Santos didn't wait for protocol. He descended the grand staircase, cutting through the crowd of stunned aristocrats. He stopped before her, his blue eyes burning with relief. "You came," he breathed. "I feel like a fool," she whispered, clutching her skirts. "They are staring." "Let them stare," Santos said, turning to face the room. He raised his hand, silencing the whispers. "My lords, ladies," his voice rang out, commanding and clear. "You have asked why I returned to Yorkshire. I tell you now, I returned because I was ashamed, and I stayed because I was saved." He took Ellarin's rough, calloused hand in his gloved one and raised it to his lips. "This is Ellarin Vance. She saved my life when I was a stranger, trapped in the mire. She taught me honor when I had forgotten it. And if she will have me, I intend to make her my wife." The room erupted in gasps. A duke marrying a tenant? It was social suicide. It was madness. Ellarin stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're crazy," she whispered. "They will eat you alive." "Let them try," Santos smiled, the same crooked, boyish smile he had given her over a bowl of broth. "I have a very strong woman to protect me." He bowed low. "May I have this dance, Miss Vance?" Ellarin looked at the shocked faces of the gentry, and then at the man who held her hand as if it were precious glass. She smiled, the ice around her heart finally shattering. "You may, William." 5 years had passed since the scandal of the solstice ball. The peasant duchess, as London society had scornfully dubbed her, had proven to be a force of nature. Under Ilarin's practical management, the Blackwood estate had transformed from a failing money pit into the most prosperous agricultural hub in the north. The fields were golden with wheat, the schools were full of children learning to read, and the Widow's Walk road had been paved with safe, sturdy stone. It was the night of the harvest festival. The great hall of the manor was thrown open, not to lords, but to the tenants. Long tables groaned under roasted meats and casks of ale. Ilarin stood on the balcony, watching the celebration. She wore midnight blue silk, but her hand still bore the faint, proud marks of her work. Santos stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You look like a queen," he murmured into her hair. "Not a queen," she laughed softly, "just a farmer's daughter who refused to be evicted." Their moment was interrupted by a courier, dusty from the road, who hurried up the stairs with a letter bearing the royal seal. Santos broke the wax, his expression serious. "It's from Windsor, Queen Victoria." Ilarin's breath hitched. "Is it bad news? Have we offended the crown?" Santos looked up, his eyes shining with pride. "Quite the opposite. Her Majesty has heard of the agricultural miracle in Yorkshire. She writes that she wishes to visit next month. She specifically asks to meet the Duchess who knows the soil." Ilarin stared at him. "The Queen wants to meet me? It seems you have conquered the Empire without ever leaving your garden." Santos grinned, kissing her temple. Later that night, when the music faded, Santos led Ilarin out of the manor for a walk. They followed the path down to the old road, where the moonlight turned the heather silver. They stopped at a stone bridge that now spanned the area once known as Deadman's Dip. The treacherous bog had been drained and filled, replaced by safe passage. At the foot of the bridge stood a small granite marker Santos had commissioned. Ilarin leaned closer to read the inscription in the moonlight. Here in the mud a stranger fell. Here in the storm a king was found, saved by the hand that wears the true crown. "You kept the boots," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I saw them in your study, the muddy ones." "I look at them every morning," Santos said, his voice thick with emotion. "They remind me that beneath the titles and the velvet, I am just a man who was drowning, and you are the woman who reached out." He turned her to face him, his thumb brushing the simple gold ring on her finger, a ring made by the local blacksmith, not a London jeweller. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. "The scandal? The hard work? Loving a man who nearly dragged you down?" Ilarin looked up at him. The wind howled across the moors, the same wild wind from that fateful night, but now it carried the scent of harvest and home. She pulled him down for a kiss, fierce and tender. "My Lord Duke," she whispered against his lips, "I would walk into that mud for you 1,000 times over." And that is the story of Ilarin and the Duke of Blackwood. It's a reminder that sometimes the people we think are our enemies are just lost souls waiting to be found, and that true nobility isn't about bloodlines, it's about character. Santos may have worn the crown, but Ilarin held the power of the human heart. What did you think? Would you have forgiven Santos for lying about his identity? Or would you have slammed the door forever? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more dramatic, romantic stories from the past, Make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Until next time, keep the lantern lit. You never know who might need saving in the storm.